is really around, I've done a lot of work around gender. And so what I thought I'd talk to you today is about how can entrepreneurs work to disperse gender stereotypes. And the reason this is, I guess, an important topic, or a topic to even discuss with you today, is that, when we think about entrepreneurship, I always ask this question of my students, when someone says even the word entrepreneur, who comes to mind? And I guess I'd like to ask you, who comes to mind for you when you hear the word entrepreneur? What do you think? What comes to people's minds?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, just shout it out.
Someone who's a risk taker.
Say that again.
Bill Gates.
A business person.
Bill Gates. Yep. Oh, I
Someone
meant
who
specifically.
is
Yeah,
a
business
risk
person.
taker.
Say that again.
Someone who's a risk taker.
A risk taker. Yeah, but who specifically? I heard Elon Musk. I heard
Jeff
Bill Gates,
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. Yep.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Okay, perfect. So you guys basically, I can ask this to any crowd, and it was interesting asking to a group of professionals in Pakistan, like hearing what happens internationally, because these are the same people we hear, right? It's like I read your mind. I knew this was coming, and I didn't include Bezos. I should have. I put Zuckerberg in there. But if you notice, right, these are the names over and over and over that we hear. And what do you notice about all of these names and these people is that they are, right, they're all one gender, they're all men, they're all one demographic, one ethnicity, they're all white men. And this has led to there being a real notion of what makes an entrepreneur. Right? If we see these as a successful image, this is success stories in entrepreneurship, and this has been the case since I've gotten into this field for 15 years, for 20 years since I did my MBA. I mean, the same names, the same types of people as success stories, and it gets even worse than that because this Forbes magazine last year came out with this list of America's most innovative leaders, right? And you see at the top 3 of them. And I don't know if you saw this list, but they had done this, comprehensive analysis of the business world and the business landscape to determine who was the most innovative. And we often substitute the word innovative with entrepreneurial, right? The most entrepreneurial leaders. And the list looked like this. This is the top 13. Tied at number 1 were 2 of the names that you mentioned, right? Bezos and Musk, and Zuckerberg, of course, Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce, Reed Hastings, who founded Netflix, Satya Nadella, of Indian descent, of Microsoft, Shantanu Narayan, so we see this list as coming down. The top 13, you will notice, are all men, not all white men, but all men. And then to get to the first, and I will say only woman, we have to get to number 75. And the woman they picked to be on this most innovative list was this woman, Barbara Rentler, who's the CEO of Ross Stores. And you probably have not heard of Ross Stores. It's a department store chain, a kind of a discount department store chain in the US. And that was it. So there was only one woman in this entire list of the most innovative people, in the world, they claimed. And the assumption you can make then, right, if you're looking at this list, is the natural assumption, or the next assumption people make, is that if there's only one woman, then clearly women aren't innovative, right? They're not innovative and they can't do this sort of thing. And then I went and looked at how did they come up with this list, right? How did they determine what makes someone innovative or not? And the methodology they used is they said they looked for media reputation for innovation. They looked at social connections, or who do these people know, their history, right? A track record of success, or they call it, value creation. That's a term we like in entrepreneurship. And finally, investor expectations. And so these were the criteria by which they were judging whether or not someone was, innovative or not, or how innovative they were. And what's important to recognize here is that, even having said that they use this methodology. I take this quote, you may have heard of the musical Hamilton, but there's a song in there and they talk about who lives, who dies, who tells your story, who's doing the analysis matters. And it turns out the researchers were also three white men, Jeff Dyer, Nathan Furr, and Mike Hendren. I actually, I don't know them personally. I know of them, of Jeff and Nathan. They are professors in strategy, right? Business professors. And the publisher, if you look down, is also a white man, right? So the point being that even if you come up with this methodology and this list, the fact that it was allowed to be published and promoted as if there's only one innovative woman in the world, right, who would be able to be on this most innovative list, I think is a real failure. And it's a real failure because it keeps promoting these stereotypes of what is successful, what works, what is supposed to be, who is an entrepreneur and who could be successful in the career of entrepreneur or, business leader. And so we have created essentially a male gendered world of entrepreneurship, because time and time again, we are identifying that entrepreneurs are men, and that, even in 2019, if we look at, how we come up with this methodology and who did this analysis, and we basically keep promoting that entrepreneurship and entrepreneuring is a male activity and only men can do this and men, would be successful. And I want to stress here that this is not just a US phenomenon. It is certainly prevalent in the US. I will tell you that there is obviously, as you saw from the Forbes list coming out, there is definitely a dominant notion that entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs, entrepreneuring is very male and masculine. But if we look globally, right, if we look at the idea of how is entrepreneurship, public policy, or women entrepreneurs viewed globally, we see some of the same themes. So, this is actually, I updated it, but didn't update on my slide. The GEM, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, they produce a women's report. And this is some colleagues at Babson. There are people at Smith College this year who collaborated to do an analysis of global, they call them, to look at the total entrepreneurial activity, the T rates across the globe. And the latest numbers from 2018, 2019, which unfortunately I don't have, but the numbers are still really good in that, women entrepreneurs are starting businesses. We have I think it's about 450 million businesses from the 2018, 2019 report that have been started by women. So a good number of women are starting to do businesses. And in fact, as I mentioned, this is outdated. Most economies around the world still have more men starting businesses. That is true. But there are about 8 countries in which women outpace men in terms of starting businesses. And there are about 6 countries, according to the country studied in the GEM report, where there's gender parity, where women are starting businesses at the same rates. But what we see is across the studies from 2011 to the latest report in 2018, 2019, is that both men and women see entrepreneurship as very attractive, as something really interesting to do, something to pursue. And so the latest GEM report talks about the number one implication that is holding women back from kind of pursuing entrepreneurship and the growth and success rates for women is that we need to address stereotypes of who are entrepreneurs and what is entrepreneurship, because there are really important policy implications. The OECD has mentioned that women's entrepreneurship is really an important untapped source of economic growth. This can be, an engine for, GDP, for, countrywide policies because of job creation, right? And also just wealth creation in terms of society. And there's a real failure when there's discrimination against women and possibility for them to become entrepreneurs. Because as you've seen, the names you listed in the beginning, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark, Bezos, they are entrepreneurs, but they are also now the wealthiest individuals in the world. So there's a market failure here if we're not enabling this for everyone. And more than that, so the KAUFFMAN Foundation, has really pointed to this specifically, that if we can expand women's entrepreneurship, we can literally grow the US economy. So there are serious implications for thinking about how do we change stereotypes? How do we think about, really enhancing or disentangling entrepreneurship from the purely kind of male view, or that only men can do this. So this is where my work really comes in. We've seen that gender imbalance is really big in entrepreneurship. And so, my research prior to getting into specifically around gender was about researching bias in investment decision-making. And prior to my PhD and my MBA, I actually worked in finance. I worked in venture capital funding, where I was the only woman on a team, but I invested in, we had a $50 million fund doing direct investments. And then I went to a women-only focused venture fund, working with women. And so just the stark comparison between how we evaluated business opportunities was noticeable to me. And so my early work was really looking at the pitch and how investors decided who to fund. But now I've really kind of drilled into thinking about women and gender because of the gap that you're seeing over and over, right? And the Forbes list is just one way to highlight how this is still happening from, I worked in the field over 20 years ago, but it feels like nothing has changed. And so just a story to illustrate this and the way gender can influence the entrepreneurship and growth in different ways is a story of one of my students. So this is Erin, and she founded this company called Entrada. And Entrada, what she was trying to do is basically give a way to teach workers in low-level jobs, a lot of the immigrant labor that comes into the States from South America and Mexico, typically, right? But from other countries as well, to teach them English while they're working. So she has this technology that they listen to language while they're doing their job, right? So they're learning English on the job. And she was selected by Rent the Runway, which was a big success story here. And the founders are two women who are now investing in other women. So she's been written up in the press. You see, she's an undergrad from Northwestern, which is a very good school here. She did her MBA at Babson when she was my student. She was a presidential scholar. She worked at TripAdvisor in product and marketing. Her company was selected for these really prestigious entrepreneurship competitions. She won several and was part of these incubators and things. And so, great background, really skilled and talented entrepreneur. So you would think she was successful. But the story kind of ends there, because even though she is very qualified, she also has a good business idea and was getting some success with the Four Seasons Hotel and a couple other customers. She never got funded. And if you can't get funded, if you can't raise growth capital, you end up growing a lot more slowly, right? And so now, and then COVID-19 hits. So now she's thinking about changing the business model to say it's not just helping, she was interested in helping women workers, but now she's going to expand to helping all workers. So her mission essentially is changing, because the feedback and the kind of lack of funding suggests that maybe, she's missing something. So when we look at women entrepreneurs in terms of funding in the States, the story's really bad. And if you look at 2019, we look at aggregate at the amount of money that went to venture capital funding, which is a growth engine for entrepreneurship. Less than 2% of all funding went to women. Men raised over $85 billion and women raised less than $2 billion. And this is a graph showing what the funding rates have looked like for the past 15 years. And the rates are the same, right? The gap is enormous here. So the reality is, like, women aren't accessing funding, so growth is challenging, but we do see more women starting businesses than ever before, because even though they're not getting funding, we see a lot of success stories. In fact, if you look at the growth trends for women-owned businesses, this is from the American Express Women-Owned Business Report. They were looking at growth of women businesses in the States. And you see that, there is enormous growth. Women are starting businesses, and in fact, 5 times greater than all businesses started in the US. So the growth rate at which women are starting businesses is really impressive. And they're growing businesses. So not only are they starting businesses, it's not just like this, people often think or have this conception that when a woman starts a business, it's a little home business, right? She's sewing something, she's baking something. But it turns out these women entrepreneurs are actually increasing employment as well, and building big businesses. So these are not trivial things. When it comes to women and entrepreneurship, I think, again, the misconception that women don't start businesses that would grow at the same rates, or that could be entrepreneurs like, Bill Gates and Bezos, et cetera, is simply wrong. So I actually did a study last year of women entrepreneurs and growth, where the question was, do these women who are building bigger businesses, who have built bigger businesses, do they still feel as if they're facing gender-based challenges? So this was a study done with Bank of America, where we took, we identified 30 women entrepreneurs across North America. We had US and Canada, and in a wide range of industries. So all sorts of industries. But our threshold was that they had to have 5 million in revenue, at least 5 million, for us to interview them and to collect data from them, basically, to be part of our sample. And so we ended up with businesses that had at least 5 million. We had 6 million, and one of the women had a $650 million business, where the average was about 43 million. And the question we asked them was essentially, you are successful. We're going in with saying, you're a successful entrepreneur, very successful by some measures, right? If we're looking purely at financials. What do you think there are still gender-based challenges that are holding you back? And what we found is that there were indeed still the feeling that because they were women, they were facing facing challenges. So the first was that they felt that people would not think their businesses were serious if they had a business that catered to women. Meaning, if you started a business with childcare, where women are typically the ones managing the childcare, or if you had a business that was, handbags or purses or something, more feminine in nature, where the woman is the customer, they would feel that the business wasn't serious, or wasn't going to be big and successful, even though they clearly are quite successful, right? So the market was already getting some stereotyping and some bias. They also felt that they were omitted from some of the networks that were important when you're building a business and trying to build a big business. There are certain networks where you get access to banks and to funding and to customers, right? Like building those relationships. And they either weren't invited to these areas, or if they were, they would be the only woman in the room. And so not really, being able to network in the same way. And the last thing comes back to capital. And I showed you those graphs of venture funding. So even at these later stages where they're looking for expansion capital or private equity capital, they're not able to access it. So they were facing some of the same challenges that startup entrepreneur women face, meaning they couldn't get funded. And then that obviously leads to slower growth. So, basically there's some assumptions about, again, these gender stereotypes about women's work and the types of businesses that women start, and the assumption that these aren't as valuable or these aren't as good, right, fundable than businesses by men. And so, I mentioned my research had been around venture capital and angel investor funding decisions, and specifically what do entrepreneurs do during the pitch. So I have a series of papers around kind of pitch behaviors in front of investors that influence investors positively, like what makes them interested in funding. So, and I look at these interpersonal factors. So what is the entrepreneur doing that builds trust with the investor? What emotion should you display when you're pitching? And so then I look specifically at gender, and the assumption out there, and there was a paper about this saying that investors are biased when a woman is pitching. So if it's just a woman walking in a room, the investor will be less likely to be interested in that company when a woman is presenting it. So I actually did a study about this, and what I did is I took pitches by men and women, and I evaluated, are they really biased against women, or is it the gender that we've constructed around how women are supposed to behave? Meaning, women, we have assumptions that have held up, and this is cross-culturally. So this is not just US based, but, globally speaking, men overall are considered to be, more bold, more aggressive, more confident, more assertive in their behaviors. And we definitely see that, my family's in India and I see consistency there. And women are supposed to be more nurturing, more gentle, more expressive, more emotive. These kinds of, these differences are stark and consistent. So what I did is I looked at the pitches based on these types of qualities for both men and women. Were they more bold and assertive, or were they more, cautious and expressive, emotional? And what I found is that investors don't want entrepreneurs who are stereotypically feminine. And stereotypically feminine could be men and women. It was not limited to only women having these types of qualities. And what the outcome was is that we are making assumptions of quality, the investors, in the decision-making role, and assumptions of value when they see an entrepreneur who presents in a feminine kind of, uncertain, non-assertive way. Because, again, going back to the beginning, we all believe that only men can be successful as entrepreneurs. And so this was, fascinating, depressing, but this is not limited to entrepreneurship. And I will tell you that I face this every day as a professor, and you may be doing this as well without realizing it. There was a fascinating study that students, they do evaluations of professors at the end of the semester. And what they did in this study is they had an online class where you couldn't see the professor, right? You never saw or heard the professor. It was all online delivery. All you knew was the professor's name, whether it was a man or a woman. And then at the end of the semester, they asked the students to rate the professor. And it was a blinded study, so they had switched, who they thought the professor was, a man or a woman. And as you see in the area circled, students gave better evaluations to the instructors they thought were male, even though the instructors, there was a man and a woman, had switched their identity. So they didn't know, who they were getting or what they were getting. And it doesn't matter, right? Because it was all the same. So just because, men basically can walk in the room and have a higher level of credibility and expertise in the role of professor, because this is what we've come to expect. A successful professor is a man, right? And I think back to my own, my MBA experience, and I had 2 women professors my whole time there. And these were both for, elective classes. And even my undergrad class, I had no women professors, 0. Right? So you can see where these assumptions of what is good come from when all we've ever seen is men in the role, right? So when you get a woman in that role, you're saying, well, why would this person be okay? Because our subconsciously, we're expecting a man. So this notion I wanted to take a little further because of that earlier study I mentioned where women with successful businesses were being told their businesses weren't as good because of who the customer was, not even them or not even the business, but the fact that it was a business for women. And so I have this picture of this woman here who, I don't know if you would know who she is, because she is, does anyone know who she is? I'm just curious. She's obviously a white woman from America, maybe. Anyone know her?
Founder of that body shaper.
Yes, that is exactly right. Her name is Sarah Blakely, and she is the founder and CEO of this company called Spanx. Spanx is a company that she started, and it's this thing called body shaping, where it's basically clothing that slims you. And women have worn these forever. They're called girdles traditionally, from the 50s and 60s. But she developed material that would make it just smoother and more comfortable to wear, and they hide under your clothes. So she tells a story that she spent 2 years trying to get funded for this business. And as the quote here from her, and I can send you the link to her interview on, there's this podcast that's become very popular in the States called How I Built This, which is all stories of entrepreneurs talking about building their businesses. And she says, I was trying to convince all these men to try and make a product they didn't even wear, which makes sense in a lot of ways, because if you go and talk to a man about a body shaping, clothing, they don't get it, they don't use it, and why would they fund it? But if she had talked to a single woman, I would have written a check. I would have said, sure, that sounds fantastic. Let's make those. Point is that she never got funded. So she bootstrapped and built the business on her own. And today she is worth billions of dollars. It is a phenomenal success story. And it's all privately held because she never took external funding because she couldn't get any. And she is now, she's on Shark Tank, which is our show of these investors, putting money into entrepreneurs. But the story was what I was really fascinated by. The fact that entrepreneurs tend to start businesses in problems they need solving, right? Problems they've identified that they understand. And so women are more likely to start businesses that cater to women, right? Or solve a problem that, we experience, we being whatever identity group you belong to, that you would understand. And so the issue then becomes, if women are the consumer or the market for a business that women start, are female-oriented businesses going to be evaluated differently by men and women investors? So just like Sarah's story of going to all these men who didn't understand what she was doing and didn't fund her, we do find that it has to be meaningful, or you have to understand the business before you'll fund it. And so what I'm showing you here is a chart of venture capital investors in the US. And in 1999, they claimed that there was about 10% of the VC investors were women. And I actually think that number is inflated because I worked in venture capital in 1999, but I was a junior level associate, but I was probably included in that number. So regardless, what this graph is showing you is that the number of women has actually gone down in terms of the venture capital funders in the US. So it's now they're calculating about 93% or so of all the investors in the US are men. And, you know, I can prove this to you by just showing you some pictures from venture capital funds, that local funds. Some of the men I know, they're wonderful. I used to put on these venture capital conferences in Boston. But it's just really interesting to think about if you're an entrepreneur and you get invited to go pitch to a Boston area venture capital fund. I want to show you who you'll be pitching to. So notice anything? It's a whole lot of men, but a whole lot of white men that make up this, this group, right? So this is who you're trying to convince to invest in you and your idea, and trying to get them to understand what your business and what this marketplace looks like. So I did a study, and I wanted to see if men investors would pick what I'm calling male markets with men CEOs, right, male CEOs, and if women investors might actually pick female-based markets like Sarah Blakely's, you know, Body Shapers with women CEOs. So the women, like I mentioned in my earlier study, that still felt they faced this bias because of the types of business they were starting. And the kind of the rationale that investors will give you is that they're investing in what they know. So this came out to be true. And in fact, I call this, if you've seen the show Shark Tank, you know, investors say, I don't use it, I'm out, right? Like, you know, and you notice on the Shark Tank, if you, and I think it's called Dragon's Den in the UK. I don't know if you get those episodes in Pakistan, but, you know, there you see there's 4 men and 2 women. And so a lot of businesses that cater to women have a less of a shot of getting invested if they don't use it and they're out. And the question is, why should this matter, right? Why should this matter? The worst part of this is that the men investors would pick a female market, meaning, you know, a Spanx type business, a Body Shaper, if there was a man's name attached to it. So if Sarah Blakely went in and pitched Spanx, she wouldn't get funded. But if Seth or Sam or, you know, a male name was attached to it, they would be more interested in funding. So is this about just what they know? No, it's what they're comfortable with. Again, fitting into what is the gender, you know, success stereotype. It's a guy, right? So you want to see a man CEO, and that'll forgive your lack of understanding of the market, because these men think men will be successful. So even though the market may be Spanx or maybe a purse company or something they don't understand, they're comfortable with the man leading it. So this, I think, is a big problem. And the big problem comes from, you know, the structural conditions that we've established. And the structurally speaking is that slide I just shared with you, where all the decision-making teams in venture capital are white men, right? So when they're in these positions of making these decisions, then we're going to see this imbalance continue. And, you know, I think there's real consequences from who's in charge. And I will tell you, I face this in my own organization. I'm just sharing with you, like, that actually the leadership has changed a bit, but the leadership had been a few months ago, you know, this was the undergraduate dean, this was the MBA dean, this was my dean, this is my dean of faculty, this was the provost, and this is our president of, you know, Babson. They are all lovely people, like wonderful, great people, but what you're noticing is, there is no diversity. It's all men. And so, you see this come up in lots of important consequential decisions. And, this is a story from, politics, but, Trump's white male team is a bad look for America, and it's bad for national security, right? When you have a lack of diversity, you're not getting a range of perspectives and a range of understanding. So what does that mean for women entrepreneurs? Could there be some positives in terms of thinking about value assessment and dispelling the gender stereotype that is clearly so prevalent, and persistent in entrepreneurship? Maybe. And I say maybe because now that we're in this pandemic, right, every business is experiencing pivoting to some extent and thinking about how do we manage home versus business. And everyone is, working from home and recognizing that there's some kind of this side hustle entrepreneurship. So everyone's doing it now. Every entrepreneur is having to be, I call it the Etsy businesses in the States. These are all the women's work, the crocheting, the sewing, all these little, home-based businesses that are traditionally undervalued. But maybe investors might find new value. Although the latest research is now saying that women are dropping out of the workforce and dropping out of careers because we're stuck managing all the, the home stuff, the kid stuff, more than men do, which, is understandable. And it's really actually unfortunate because of what it's doing to women overall in the economy. And this quote by, Vera Rubin, who I don't know, but I love this idea of recognizing the economy isn't closed, everyone's working, but it's not valued because, again, who's doing the valuation are economists, and we have traditionally completely overlooked it. Why do we undervalue women's unpaid, women's labor? Is that things like childcare and homemaking and all the things you need to actually run the household are not valued in most societies. So, big picture, we need to change this. We need to change how we value and what do we value. And that means we need to change leadership, right? We need to change investment decision-making structures and definitely the employment policies and what it enables some people and some others, to do or not to do. And again, I will point a finger at economists because, I've been to the American Economic Association. If you look at economists in general, they are all white men, and they all have taken this approach to women's work and valuing women's work that it's become a global standard. Some of the, Scandinavian countries have thought about how do we value these types of home labor economics, but most don't, and US certainly doesn't. So it has embedded in our cultures these subconscious valuations of what is, and how they're gendered. So I'm going to land on what can entrepreneurs do? This is the reality. This is what we live in. This is what's happening in the world. What can they do? What are some practical steps that we can take? Well, there are, the steps to disperse this need to be really taken by everybody, because we know that the feminine gender, right, is discounted in entrepreneurship. And the research too, I look at the field of entrepreneurship research and has been traditionally done by white men. And there's even become the standard that the successful or the only model, the way we value, again, the valuation of entrepreneurship has been from a very male dominated perspective, meaning our norm is the white male entrepreneur. Like that's our definition of what is an entrepreneur and how we value or how we research what entrepreneurs do. And I think that's really wrong. And I'm trying to do work in this area. Others are too. We really need to think about changing that logic, that is the only way to view entrepreneurship. And so, it's created some structural or some, basically some subconscious associations that I notice now in research talks, right? That why do we call this the standard? Why is that the valuation? but that's what we need to start thinking about, me personally, and certainly others in the field. But you have to have that in mind as a practical entrepreneur. And there's this fabulous story from Fast Company, which is a magazine in the States about entrepreneurship. And this is from 2017. And the story was about these two women entrepreneurs and how they actually created a fake male co-founder in order to get around startup sexism that they definitely experienced, particularly in the tech world in the Bay Area. And so what they did is they created a CEO, named him Keith, and his name, no joke, was Keith Mann, M-A-N-N. And they found they got a lot more interest, conversations, and potential when Mr. Mann was having the conversations. Now that is an extreme version of what I think you can do, but the practical sense is that honestly, I would, if I was an entrepreneur doing a feminine focused business, I would de-emphasize that. I would not focus on the feminine or the female end user aspects of the business. Instead, I would really point to the gender neutral positives, meaning how big is the market, right? What markets do you serve? The geography, the operations, how many employees have you hired? What kind of growth trajectory? All these kind of financial, very specific, get away from the fact that it's women or appealing to women, and really think about taking on the masculine role when you present. So meaning, being assertive and bold and using masculine language, meaning I have another study looking at the language of pitches, and it turns out using really visionary or really kind of uplifting language, very future focused language is very useful when you pitch about your business. And I even extend that to saying, really, develop masculine goals for the business, meaning men walk in and say they're going to build $1 billion business. They put that in the financials, even though everyone knows they're not going to do it. A woman walks in and says a very conservative, very practical, here's how the growth would go. More often is what I will say. So a very feminine kind of, cautious approach. And I'm saying lose that, right? Women should walk in and also walk in and say they're going to build $1 billion business, because everyone knows they're not, no one can do that. But you should say you could. And finally, I think for any man or woman in entrepreneurship, because the norm has been a white man as a founder, as an entrepreneur, I think we all need to channel that when thinking about audiences and, find out, what would a white man do? Ask them, like, what is your response? What is your reaction? How would you handle the situation? I do this personally all the time. I will admit to you, I do this. I ask, to find out. And then I would suggest in entrepreneurship, because there is no backlash, unlike other areas, that, women and men should do that, like act and do that, like take that advice. So it's a little depressing to land there, but this is the reality of what we're living with. And so with that, I will stop, and I will happy to take any questions, any thoughts, and I will stop sharing.
Thanks you a lot, Professor Lakshmi Balachandra. I'm Dr. Shahid Qureshi, the program director at the IBA Center for Entrepreneurship. And I'm a Babson Fellow. I've been there 3-4 times, and I learned a lot. I learned various sessions. See, I know many professors, the picture which you were showing, Diana, Dr. Diana, and Heidi Neck.
Yeah, Heidi, of course. Yes.
These are superstar female entrepreneur professors.
It's true.
And you're one of them as well. So I will. So any female participants, Faiqa, Saiba, do you want to have any question? And you can ask, anybody who would like to ask in English or Hindi if possible, if difficult. Zara Saiba?
She is not
He doesn't
No,
know.
I don't speak Hindi. I speak Telugu. I'm from South India.
Okay, great.
I know acha. That's about it.
Acha.
Acha.
So
ठीक है.
Can I go on, Dr.
yes, Zara, please go on.
Mr. Balachandra, it's a privilege to attend this session from you. I have just some my own observation here. I think it's more about in entrepreneurship in subcontinent. I would consider the subcontinent to have similar problems with women entrepreneurship. It's more about the structure that is on the ground. It has more power oriented. So the women who has a backing which are strong, they are more freely able to start a business. So masculinity is there, but then comes what background you are coming from. So that is also a structurally grounded here. Male, female, they all face this problem. If you don't have a strong backing, you are not financially strong, you are not coming from a background that can basically support you in case you fail in your venture, it causes a problem as well. So that is my experience. Maybe strong background, you can take that for people, investors, or the business you want to start. It tends to be more successful, or you can start it at least, albeit on a small scale. So that's just one thing I wanted to add.
Thank you very much. Very good comments.
No, it is. I wanted to say that is one aspect of entrepreneurship that even in the West, right, even in the US, if you look at the backgrounds of Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, they actually all come from wealthy families. They are not coming from nothing. They already Bill Gates was given access to computer programming at his elite private school that nobody had, right? Like no common, American had. So they already had such an advantage going into entrepreneurship. I completely agree. And also there, we see this still certainly in the States in terms of even secession, right? And I'm seeing this at Babson. We have a lot of family business kids that come to Babson for their degree. And it's, women and men that are coming from very wealthy families, right? Very successful families. And it's a little different. It's a different experience for men and women coming from that background. So yeah, I completely agree. And I don't personally do work in this area, but I think there's a lot to be said in terms of gender stereotypes and then looking at kind of family positions.